And while you're settling in, we're going to take testimony for the next hour or so on H614, which is an act relating to land improvement fraud and timber trespass. We had some testimony last week on this bill. After we wrap up here and after we have a short break, Mike Grady is going to come in and he's going to go over specifically. I asked him to go over the section of the bill that deals with seizure because there were some questions that committee had last week on that. And after the testimony today, there may be other things that we want to talk to him about. And we have the rest of the morning set aside conversation if we need that time. So with that, you'll have to remind me, I know you were in last year, but this is your first time this year in the committee?
It is.
Well, welcome back.
Yep.
You remember all of us, so
Yes, we do.
if you can just launch right in.
Okay. For the record, Danielle Fitzko, call me Danny, Commissioner of Forest Parks and Recreation. Thank you for the opportunity to be with you today on H614, an act relating to land improvement fraud and timber trespass, and for taking testimony on this important topic. It's unfortunate that you're hearing testimony on this and that it's still occurring in Vermont and it's an issue. This has been an area that the department has taken seriously for many years and has worked hard to address. Yet FPR really has no authority here. And we are also, you heard from Michael O'Grady that this is his third time working on the timber trespass bill, which means that we're still working to get it right. As you heard from Sam Lincoln, that when he was with the administration and certainly Commissioner Snyder, they both worked actively to address this issue. And back in 2015, the General Assembly made significant updates to the timber trespass law, Title 13, including clarifying the two actions under the law, civil and criminal. After that, we were hopeful that things would change. However, as others have stated, there is an issue with enforcement. Despite the significant losses in property that landowners have endured, law enforcement and state attorneys either have failed to recognize that there's a criminal action or are too busy to put the cases on their docket. And clearly, we know that they have huge workloads and demands on them. So yes, 9 years later, we're back again talking about it. And yes, it has been going on for decades. I also want to share right up front, and you heard this from others, that this is not to be looked on at the logging community as a whole. We have a very professional logging community in Vermont that go above and beyond to do things right. Yet we have a handful and some repeat offenders that we've all been referring to as bad actors. And some of those bad actors were in business in 2015 when we made those updates to the timber trespass law, and some of those bad actors are still in business today. These nefarious loggers, they're thieves, they are smart, and they know how to work the system. Some of them are dangerous, and they put a black eye on the logging community as a whole. It's unfortunate because this comes at a time when there is growing misunderstanding of forest management, and its values and benefits are unfortunately coming into question. And the sector is going through some very difficult times to remain in business. As we look to the future of the forest product sector in Vermont, we cannot let these bad actors grab the headlines and make landowners fearful and object to doing good forest management that we do right here in Vermont. Instead, we want headlines that celebrate the professionalism of the industry as ecosystem managers that are harvesting climate smart, renewable products that we all need and use. Taking a beat off the agricultural community, our logging community is key to our wood security for the future. I look forward to coming back to this community and talk about how do we support the professional logging community and the good work that they're doing, because they are facing some real challenges adapting to climate change and workforce issues. But unfortunately, because of a few bad actors, we're here and diverting our attention towards them. I appreciate Representative Mahaley for listening to his constituents and working collaboratively with the professional logging community to put something forward that really expands the toolbox to get to timber trespass. I want to address a few areas that we hope this bill can help solve. The bill adds new language to the home improvement statute to clarify that land improvement defined to include timber harvesting can be pursued by the Attorney General's office. So another tool in the toolbox. The bill also establishes a new requirement on those entities that have been convicted of timber trespass, land improvement fraud, and have unpaid civil and criminal judgments to file a financial surety and comply with a notice requirements prior to engaging in timber harvesting. Another tool in the toolbox. Another important piece that I think will really help FPR is that if they're convicted of land improvement fraud, they go on a registry. We now have a tool that we can put out there and share. These are the bad actors. And then there's the seizure and forfeiture of equipment, which I know you're going to hear more about today. If this can be enforced, I think it would help stop the bad actors from doing business. As Michael O'Grady suggested, there are some real potential limitations of it if it can be enforced. And I would recommend you talking to the Attorney General's office, the state attorney, about the realities of this. Again, FPR has no authority here. Overall, I think it's great to expand the toolbox, but we also need to better understand why law enforcement state attorneys have been reluctant to get involved with these timber theft matters. As others have testified, without enforcement of these laws, the bad actors will stay in business. And again, the committee will probably want to talk to them. I've listened to the previous testimony over the past week, and I wanted to address a few issues that came up and said to talk to FPR, so I'll just kind of address them now. One of them was, do we want a track and trace system? I think you heard from Dana Duran mentioned Maine has this system. It's highly bureaucratic with a large administrative overhead and with forest rangers to enforce. I'll just share that this would be a huge shift in Vermont and a huge lift. And the question is, if this is really about a few bad actors, is this the tool we need? Will they follow the law and will it be enforced? As Sam mentioned, it is a best practice to have mill slips in place, and we need to work with professionals like PLC to make landowners aware of the expectations when working with the logging contractor. We all need to be working together to raise awareness, and I'm really hopeful now with some new energy from PLC that we can really raise the awareness and work together to get that information out. Also, when I look at the bigger picture and where we want to invest in the forest product sector, you also have H624 on the wall, an act relating to providing financial assistance to the forest economy. Do we want to spend our limited resources lifting up a track and trace for the bad actors? Or do we want to invest in supporting the many professional loggers that are suffering economic impact and helping them adapt and keep them in business? I think those are some of the trade-offs that we'll have to talk about. A question came in about, will they get kicked out of UVA if they had timber trespass? I think we shared FPR is frustrated with this, and we are very sympathetic to landowners that have experienced timber trespass. We look at it on a case-by-case basis, and if it's clear that there was theft and the landowner learned about it and took action, in most cases, they're not going to be kicked out of UVA. There may be some administrative paperwork we have to go through, but we understand that it was not their fault. I will say, though, that some of the bad actors, as I said, are smart. And in many cases, they will target landowners that are not in UVA because they do not have a forester on and they aren't following a forest management plan. So that seems to be a pattern that we've seen. There was also a question about who's responsible for the acceptable management practices for protecting water quality on logging jobs, the AMPs. In general, the way it works is FPR works with the contractor and the landowner to address any water quality violations. If the contractor is no longer in the picture, we will still pursue the logger for the water quality violation, including correcting the actions on the land. In the end, the discharges still need to be addressed. If we're unable to get the logger to address the discharge on the land, and sometimes the landowners don't even want them back on the land, we do have to remediate, and the landowner is responsible for that. And we do our best to hold their hand and support them to making those improvements, remediation on the land. So I guess I'll just kind of say that, yes, there's a few bad actors. Do we put laws in place for a few bad actors? If this really expands the toolbox to create less harm on the land, to protect landowners, to actually, and protect like the social license of our professional loggers. I think it's worth it. And I think the main question is also, will this be enforced? So thank you for having me. That's what I had to share. I'm happy to answer any questions. And as I did mention, I do have two colleagues here with me today, Megan Purvey, who's our general counsel, who's been with FPR for 20 years. So she's got a lot of experience, and Keith Thompson, who's our private lands program manager. It's sort of his team's on the front line here. So I just offer them, if there's questions that come up, we can swap. Maybe they have better expertise than I do.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Questions? Yes, Representative Lee.
Commissioner, thank you, and thank you for your thoughtful testimony. You know, one thing that came up last week when we were discussing H 614, and that was the idea of a study with regarding the track and trace. So my questions on that were, what will it cost? Who is going to enforce it? And who is going to staff it? And by what agency? Is it FPR? So those are three questions, and I tend to support your notion that there are better investments, but I'd like to know if you have any sense of what it might cost to staff and enforce such a system.
I think it would be a big lift. I will say, I think it was back in 2019, the department did do a report on a harvest notification system. So it's not a full track and trace. It would just be a notification, and then we would be able to send landowners some information. At that time, for just a notification, I think they were looking at a couple of additional staff. I think at that point, maybe it was like $250,000 to $300,000. I think that would be a lot more to lift up a full track and trace. And today that would probably be about $500,000 reality. So it's a huge investment. We don't have the enforcement authority. We don't have rangers on staff, so that would need to be considered. I understand there's been some support for doing a study. I would say we have the tools in place if they're being enforced. So I think the question is, what are the barriers to enforcement?
Thank you. I mean, we agree that enforcement is the key, and getting that piece right is essential through.
And a reminder, this is not large. This is not like widespread. I think our scales is really different than what we see in Maine.
Sure, you mentioned foresters and you in UVA in that context. When there's, and we heard that one sort of type of fraud taking place here is a job that creeps across property lines or goes onto someone else's land. We heard from others that sometimes that happens inadvertently.
Yeah.
You might be out in the woods cutting and then, legitimately making a mistake. In the case of a landowner who's enrolled in the UVA and works with a forester, is that, I'm just wondering if you could comment, is that really likely to happen, or under the guidance of a forester, are you going to have a pretty clear sense, you as the logger, where you're supposed to be cutting and where you're not supposed to be cutting?
So it's if the boundaries are marked well and they understand, then it's not going to happen. But I think in reality, it does happen. I mean, there are tools in place now. We have GIS mapping systems to help, but I think it does happen. And I think that was the concern of the PLC, that sometimes it does happen because the landowner didn't mark it well, and they have a civil case against them, but they pay it off. I think in some cases it does happen, but hopefully the boundaries are marked well.
Yes, Representative Levitt.
Oh, just thinking about the boundaries, there are also easy tools you have on your phone, so you know exactly where the boundary line is, and it shouldn't be rocket science not to cut on someone else's land.
I guess I can't speak to this greatly. Keith may have more information to add here if you want to bring him up after. He definitely works with teams on the ground more.
If Keith and if others want to scroll down a note and
Yeah.
and bring folks up later to go over any outstanding questions, but that's
Yeah.
all. Yeah, thank you. Other questions? Yes, Representative O'Brien.
Denny, what relationship since you oversee the county foresters, what's their relationship with non-current use jobs, if any?
Well, we'd love to support all private landowners. We have an administrative responsibility for oversight of those enrolled in forest land, but we try to service all forest landowners, all acres. Certainly in some counties where there's a heavy workload of UVA, that takes a lot of focus. And we also work with municipalities and their town forests. So they're available to talk and take a walk on the land with anyone that calls. And we do a lot of also educational outreach opportunities to talk about forest management. And just honestly, getting out in the woods and understanding their land and appreciating their land. And then they get a stronger sense of a land ethic and are better stewards of the land when we are able to get them better, connected to it, really.
So if I'm
You can call.
senior Vermonter, I can call up FDR and say, could a forester come and look at my land and meet this logger who drove by the other day and says they want to cut some of my property?
Yeah, this is an area I think we can do a lot better in education outreach. We did do some development of some educational resources called Cut with Confidence several years ago with a series of brochures and a website that sort of gives landowners the information they need. But our problem is we don't keep the constant pressure on it. But I do think we have the opportunity for partnerships to invest in better education and outreach. The Forestry Division within FPR for the first time has an education and outreach specialist that we started about a month ago. I mean, this is big for us. And so I think with working with VFPA and PLC, that it's that partnership with the private industry associations, we can really do a good job of getting that message out. In some states, they have what they call call before you cut campaigns, where they put it, like call the county foresters and talk to them. And that's what I think would go a long way to get information out to people, know that we are here and we want to help.
Representative Lipsky.
Yeah, to follow up on John's comment, I'll give you an example. It was 18 months ago. 2 landowners approached me who had a unmanaged and high mortality Norway spruce plantation that wasn't both their land, but the total volume of area was probably 3.5 acres. Rather than me make the ecological judgment that this was a liquidation because of failure to ever manage it, I went to the Lamoille County Forester, invited them to come out to get a professional opinion. I'm not saying I'm a responsible logger, therefore this was an obvious decision. I didn't want controversy by neighbors and neighborhood association. That forester came out, said, there's less than 10% live crown, any of this. There's at least 50% mortality of the stems. And it's really the only treatment that can meet the needs of having it convert to landowners. Wouldn't have qualified as a UVA property, but they are a resource and responsible loggers do that, and they go to it. For reinforcement of our judgment, I asked if she would, in this case, send me an email documenting our visit, were there any seeps or wetland, any sensitive areas? Check. So I was able to proceed with confidence. The landowners were not feeling vulnerable. So they are an important resource. You got to use.
Just gotta make sure they know that we're there.
Should be on every town website.
It's a great idea.
Before we switch over to the Attorney General's office, just wanted to clarify about this question of land that's enrolled versus land that isn't enrolled. So, and I guess what I'm wondering ultimately, and you may not have the answer, but is whether, generally speaking, the problem we're trying to address here is on land that isn't enrolled, whether landowners who are not enrolled are the ones who are typically the victims. And then also, I think it would be helpful for us to know, for a number of reasons, and you may have this number at the top of your head, what percentage of land or how much of the land in the state is owned by, is enrolled, I guess is what I'm.
Yeah. So in the forest land UVA category, there's about 16,000 parcels of land enrolled and about 2 million acres out of 4.5 million acres. So a lot. I think overall what's eligible, maybe 60%, 65% is, so if you think about like, it has to be 25 acres or more of that, those lands that are 25 acres or more, it's higher. 70% are enrolled. So really a good portion of what can be is enrolled. Got a little cheat sheet here with Keith. So I mean, it has happened on UVA land that are land enrolled, but I think that they tend to prey on those that are not. And I say that just seems to be a pattern that we have seen. But I think and I think you heard from previous testimony that they say like they'll go to be in the neighborhood and they'll kind of knock on doors and stay in the area. But we've seen it on both. And so I do think the reality of those that are in UVA are just more informed about, and they typically have a forester, so they don't call the forester up. And so, or they know about the county foresters. So they just have a little bit more of a broader knowledge about the support networks that are available.
In theory, they have a plan.
Yes, they have a plan.
That doesn't include somebody randomly showing up and cutting.
And that they could come in and say, the plan typically are going to have a prescription in there for some forest management. So they may say that we're going to implement that. And then they go clearly above and beyond and don't follow the plan.
Okay. Thank you. Yes, Representative Wilson.
A quick question. Years ago, I owned Sheffield. We had 60 acres and we hired a logger to do a small portion. And I guess there were little things going on. My wife was at home and 2 trucks went out and he paid us for one. And then I made a habit of start checking the site myself. And I confronted him. I said, you're cheating. You're not keeping your word. And he said, well, there's nothing you can do about it. And I said, that's your opinion. We had a verbal agreement. You're not keeping it. I want you to leave. And he says, well, I don't know what I'm going to do about it. This was years ago. And so he said, I'm not going to do anything today. I'll be back tomorrow. So when he left, he had a tractor. I put some of his equipment in the tractor. I took it off the property, started up the skidder, took that off the property, put a sign on it and said, you're fired. Could I have gotten in trouble?
You had to call law enforcement. It sounds like you did the right thing.
I mean, he never came back and confronted me.
Did you come back and get a stop?
Off the road, yeah.
But
He
you-
was off my property. I took him down by the town road, 3/10 of a mile away from my house.
Sounds like you knew it was wrong. It doesn't sound like there was a written contract in place.
It was a verbal contract, but still that means something.
Yeah, it does.
Maybe.
I don't know, Attorney General's coming up next.
Can ask that question. Okay, we're all set then? Thank you.
Thank you.
So Megan, would you like to come up? Good morning.
Good morning.
Have you been in our committee before?
I have not.
Let's go around quickly and just introduce ourselves so that you know who we are. Representative Levitt.
Josie Levitt, represent Grandal Chittenden, which is all of Grandal County and Westminster.
Mike Rice, represent the Bennington Rutland District, Danby, Dorset, Glen Grove, Mount Tabor, and Peru.
Don O'Brien, I represent Tunbridge and Rock.
Esme Cole, Windsor 6, Hartford. Heather Supernaut, Windsor 4, Barnard, Pomfret, and Bridgewater.
David Durfee, Shaftesbury, and Glastonbury.
Rodney Graham, Lansdowne, Chelsea.
Jed Lipsky, Lamoille 1 District, Stowe.
Henry Pearl, represent the towns of Danville, Peach, and McCarran.
Charles Wilson, Caledonia 3, which is Sheffield, Wheelock, Sutton, Newark, and Linden.
Great. Thank you for having me. I'm Megan Harris. I'm an Assistant Attorney General in the Environmental Protection Unit at the Attorney General's Office. Thank you for having me today.
Thank you for coming in.
The Attorney General's Office is happy to be a voice on this topic. I have a few points that I'd like to walk through, and then I'll do my best to answer your questions. First, I'll outline the AGO's experience with the problem that I understand H614 seeks to address. Landowners may receive a knock at their door with an offer to log their property at no cost. Verbal and sometimes written agreements are reached. They'll be paid a portion for the trees every couple weeks. You don't have to do anything. I'll take care of it all, is the way it goes. Landowners are not typically informed or able to do this work on their own. It's like an offer for free money. I'd like to pause here to note that it's at this point, these landowners may be most vulnerable. They also might be most able to prevent what sometimes happens next. But to be clear, what they were offered is not in these situations what they receive. Landowners may come to realize they're not being paid, their trees are gone, and their land is a mess. Their logger may not present solutions and may leave. Some landowners may be afraid. The investment those trees and that land provides is damaged or gone for decades. This is true whether a logger does it once or more than once. The vulnerability and the harm is similar. It's at this point after the transaction when the legal tools will come into focus. Next, I'd like to give a brief overview of the law potentially applicable that's specific to logging jobs in Vermont. And this is slightly more broad than what Ledge Counsel Mike O'Grady provided during the walkthrough.
And I'm sorry, are you going to now tell us about existing law, or are you going to be speaking to
That's right,
existing law?
existing law. And this may help with an understanding of the limits of enforcement authority. Vermont law provides two causes of action for damaging the tree of another. One, a private civil action for timber trespass with a remedy of treble damages. So triple damages as punishment and deterrent. Two is the crime of knowingly and recklessly committing timber trespass, so damaging the trees of another. That does include the taking and carrying away. It's also a crime to transport stolen trees. It is the crime of larceny to, with specific intent, take a parcel of realty that includes trees. It's the crime of home improvement fraud to knowingly fail to perform, to misrepresent, or deceptively essentially engage, and I'll quote, the limbing, pruning, and removal of trees or shrubbery that is upon land adjacent to a dwelling house. The Natural Resources Board, as you may be familiar, administers permitting for improvements above 2,500 feet in elevation. FPR, as you've heard, regulates heavy cutting of 40 acres or more. FPR and the tax department regulate the eligibility for the current use program. As you've heard, that's for 25 or more acres of managed forest land. And then the Agency of Natural Resources pursues administrative enforcement, and the Attorney General's office, also through the unit where I work, the Environmental Protection Unit, pursues civil enforcement of discharge of waste to waters of the state. So that includes for logging jobs. H614 proposes to add the crime of land improvement fraud to the existing home improvement fraud statute. Among other land improvement activities, this would bring fraudulent logging practices into the same framework for fraudulent home improvement practices. General Clark views this as beneficial for a few key reasons. For all offenses, including initial offenses, there is a publicly available criminal registry posted on the Attorney General's website, specifically for home improvement fraud. That would also apply with land improvement fraud. For second and subsequent offenses, continued logging would require advance notice from the logger to the Attorney General. And then it would also include either financial surety, or the logger would need to notify whom they're working with of that crime. Another benefit is landowner protection by calling out fraudulent land improvement practices as a crime that's unique and comparable to home improvement fraud, where the damage is what may be to a lifelong investment and where landowners really have very limited ability to stop the harm or to fix the damage themselves. Given the gravity of the situation, H614 may offer more information to landowners who are considering logging, and it may provide another means to stop repeat offenses. What H614 does is add a tool to the toolbox. I have also heard committee testimony of others describe frustration with this problem as a black eye on the profession. I've heard H614 may be a step to professionalize the industry. As you consider the question at that initial point of the exchange with the logger, what can be done to better inform and empower landowners to prevent consumer harm? General Clark suggests Sunrise assessment of the industry for professional regulation. Complex problems may require both a direct route and also a holistic approach to solve. I'm happy to support committee members in answering questions.
Thank you. Committee Representative O'Brien.
So maybe this is a question for the commissioner, you must know too, is that above 40 acres, you need a permit if you're gonna do a clear cut on any property?
My understanding is there's a notice requirement, but yes, for above 40 acres.
And what, you know, the process for that, or is it just, you know, paperwork, or does that include county foresters coming out and looking at a piece just from like environmental sensitivity?
I am not quite as fully informed of the full length of requirements and process that someone would need to go through for a heavy cut. Potentially, Commissioner may be able to address that, or I could follow up.
Good. We'll see if we can get somebody from the Commissioner's office to respond to that before we wrap up. Representative Graham.
So my question is, I mean, we can follow laws and book the law, but will AG enforce this, which put it into law?
So home improvement fraud right now as a crime, that's something that's primarily pursued by state's attorney's offices, not by the Attorney General's office. The Attorney General's office manages the registry, which is the full list, and the notice requirement and the financial surety is handled by and through the Attorney General's office. But pursuit of the crimes, say of land improvement fraud or home improvement fraud, is something that would primarily be pursued by state's attorney's offices.
And you say that just because of the way the language is written, it would be consistent with, it's written to be parallel with home improvement fraud, so it would logically follow that the state's attorneys would be the ones who would be addressing it?
So I should say first, I handle environmental law primarily. I'm in the environmental unit. The prosecutor would be able to speak much more fully to answer a question of the limits, or allocation of cases and full pursuit of cases between the state's attorney's office and the Attorney General's office. So speaking with the prosecutor would potentially be helpful. But my understanding of the pursuit of most current home improvement fraud cases is through the state's attorney's offices. And so it would be similar with land improvement.
Representative Levitt?
I guess my question is how are landowners supposed to know what the process is when something has happened and someone has effectively stolen their timber and they had either not a great written contract or a verbal agreement? Is there a way that we can do some education for landowners so they know, not to do this, have a really solid written agreement? And then if something goes wrong, how do they know who to call? Because I'm thinking it would never occur to me to call my state's attorney. I would call the sheriff first and then hope the sheriff would then direct me, assuming I could get someone in Grand Isle to actually answer the phone at the sheriff's office, which is a problem depending on what county you're in. So I guess, is there an educational component to help landowners?
I think there's a big opportunity to educate landowners. But specifically to address your question of what could help those landowners once they're in the middle of a situation. I think it's a tough one to answer from my position. And I certainly would say that a criminal prosecutor could answer better as to local law enforcement and also to their office. But certainly, of course, as probably you've heard from other lawyers coming in, right? Speaking with a lawyer is, of course, the best avenue to learn full legal options, once you've been harmed. And other resources like the Department of Forest Parks and Rec in terms of education and outreach. But potentially a criminal prosecutor might be able to better answer the question of, what to know when you're thinking about calling your sheriff.
It feels like there's a gap here because not everyone knows they have a county forester. And I had the county forester come to my land because we're trying to figure out, like, what do we do with these woods? Because are they healthy? Are they not healthy? And she was invaluable. And we weren't having anyone come to look at our land to, cut things down. But we're just like, give us a sense of how do we save this field? What trees are worth it? And it feels like that's where we could have Stanton. But it feels like that's a gap. And that's a free service. And, if we could figure out how to hook up the county forester with the landowners before this all comes to needing lawyers and state's attorneys, I feel like that's a missing piece as well. So I'm just wondering if there's a way we could loop all of this together.
Make a note of that because it's something we could.
Okay.
About. Let's have Representative Lipsky and then I want to move on.
Megan, thank you. Your testimony's been helpful. This committee had the most uncomfortable testimony probably a year or so last week of landowners who were victims of intentional timber fraud and theft and have fought, in some cases, 8 years of their lives trying to get enforcement or a just settlement, whether it's in civil or criminal court. And they have gotten nowhere with local police, with state police, with state's attorneys, or the Attorney General's office. They feel that the entire system and FPR is not the enforcement agent. So they have had nowhere where they've gotten satisfaction. So prior to Representative Mahali's bill, it's been a complete disaster across the board in law enforcement or protection for landowners. So your recommendations and path forward, it needs to be more encompassing than the modest state's county forester, for instance. when something's going down, the landowner is being threatened physically, financially, and other ways, there needs to be somebody who says, well, I'm the police chief or I'm the sheriff, and yes, I can get a cease and desist and protect you. So that's my big concern. We can have all the glorious protections in mind moving forward, but it has to clear and strong on enforcement and protection. Thank you.
Tiny question.
Representative O'Brien first.
I just, because we have you here and we're not judiciary, what is that relationship between the Attorney General's office and state's attorneys? Where do various cases go? I don't even know.
Yeah, so I'll again have to tell you that a criminal prosecutor will be able to give you a better answer on this. It's definitely not my expertise. But I do know that the Attorney General's office in terms of criminal prosecution is primarily handling murders, sex crimes, use of force review. Of course, it's broader than that, and there is concurrent jurisdiction between our office and state's attorney's offices. Beyond that kind of general answer, the committee may benefit most from speaking with a criminal prosecutor. And of course, we have some in our office, so I'm happy to take that back if you'd like.
So who did the state's attorneys answer to? Who's the top there? Is it the Attorney General?
I don't know the answer. This specific
They're
answer
elected.
to that.
We elect them.
Right.
Yeah.
But they're, beyond that, they're independent?
That's what I thought.
I understand. You got a quick question?
Just a quick question, where does the town tree warden figure into all of this? And maybe nobody knows, but like we have a tree warden and we have to check with him about certain things. And I'm wondering if that person, I don't know if every town has a tree warden, but I wonder if that person could be sort of the disseminator of information, maybe just quarterly sending something out to the town and keeping it simple, because he's usually someone in town that people really trust. But I'm trying to figure out easy ways to get information that doesn't overtax people who are already overtaxed. Our tree warden, he could send out an email once a quarter, I would think.
So why don't we let the Attorney General's office leave the table, because I'm not sure that's a question for her. And that may be a question we can ask later on, but it may also be part of a larger committee conversation of ways that we might want to think about other changes to the bill. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Chris.
Morning.
Good morning.
For the record, Chris Delia, President, Vermont Bankers Association. It's been several years since I've been in the Ag Committee, so I appreciate the opportunity to come in.
Yeah.
I heard your introduction.
Also around the table again, but
I'm good.
yeah, thank you.
But appreciate the opportunity to join you. So I'm very much an outsider to this issue. My particular area of focus is on the seizure section of Vermont statute, as your legislative counsel alluded to the other day. I appreciate Representative Mahali's outreach to me prior to the holidays to let me know that he was talking about this bill and was going to introduce something. If I can digress ever so slightly, Representative Lipsky, I was really struck last Friday by the testimony of the landowners in this case. And for the life of me, cannot figure out how this practice has gone on for years without some level of enforcement. It just strikes me, coming from a highly regulated industry, the banking industry, this would be unheard of to have these types of, or any type of criminal activity going on in our industry go on for any length of time. So I'm just struck by that. And I hope 614 can bring some resolution, but as you've talked about this morning, enforcement seems to be very much the key to some level of satisfaction here. So on the seizure piece, we're interested in that. As you heard again last week, some of this equipment can cost a heck of a lot of money. It may be financed through a dealer, it may be financed through a local institution, depending on the relationships that exist. And if that equipment is used as collateral for the loan and it's seized, we need to make sure we're protecting our collateral interest to get repaid for that loan. So it's my understanding that this bill does nothing to impact the existing seizure statutes in Vermont, and we're grateful for that. And as long as that's the case, we'll continue to just listen. We are supportive of your measures here in 614. If you do change seizure, seizure statutes based on your discussion later this morning, we'll certainly participate further. But again, we're just coming at it from the perspective of wanting to ensure the collateral is protected. And it is already dealt with in our existing seizure statutes.
And so we will hear more about those statutes. So I don't think we need to grill you on them, because probably Mike is the expert. But it's good to know that as they currently exist, and as the bill is currently written, it doesn't change anything that concerns you. Okay. Okay. Do other folks have questions? All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ed?
Morning. To be with you again. Happy to be here and all that. I'm Ed Larson. I'm the lobbyist for the Vermont Forest Products Association. And although former legislator Representative Peter Youngbear referenced me as someone he worked with when he served here, I have to say I'm kind of amazed I'm still here. That was 35 years ago.
Not amazed, but we were surprised that you were still here, because we understood that last year might have been your
Yeah, and yes, well, I'm still here. I gave them another year to figure out what they want to do. It's not an easy job, and there's a lot to it, and you don't want to just have somebody who doesn't understand the process or the industry doing this. So, and I'll probably still be around even if we do get a replacement to be the mentor. It's just the way it's going to have to work. I've invested too much of my life into this industry and into this process that it would be wrong for me to let go. But anyways, thank you for the opportunity to testify on this. We like this bill. I'm going to go back in history a little bit. As you all recall, I used to own a sawmill back in the early 80s up until 1992. The logger that we were talking about last week from Plainfield did ship wood to my mill. A landowner came to my property and asked did said logger ship any wood to you recently? And I go, I've gotten some wood from him, yes. But he didn't pay me. Okay. So that's the first time I heard that he was stealing timber. Next time he came into me, I refused to take his load. I told him to find another place to ship your wood. I will not buy it. That's hard to do for a mill because you need wood. And but we do it. Okay. Now, at that point, I keep my mouth shut. I'm in business. My contract is with the logger. It's not with the landowner. That's why when you ask, should mills play a role in this? Well, if they choose to, yes, but you shouldn't require them to. So pretty clear there. That same logging contractor, a few years ago, I called, I had a job. I'm a forester now. I had a job in the Marshfield, Plainfield area. And I called around to a couple of logging contractors that I knew up there that my regular guys were too busy and I had them on other jobs. And people talk. Next day, I got a call from that very same logging contractor. He says, I'd like to bid on it. And I says, well, I will not let you bid on it. So, you know, we can blackball these guys and we try to do that. But, you know, Mr. Caribou story, Mr. Young Air story, is not new to me. I've heard a lot more of them. A lot of that wood goes to Canada. And how do you get Canada to, abide by our laws? You can't. So, it's more complicated than it really should be. Now, our association started in 1979. We were called the Timber Producers and Truckers Association. So that was loggers and truckers. In 1992 or one, we changed the name to the Vermont Forest Products Association because we realized that our work wasn't just concentrated on policy for the logging, the primary producer and the truckers. Even though those were big issues, we were dealing with workers' comp and road conditions. We still are. But mills were involved, and we had foresters. But the current use program beginning to mature, more and more foresters were becoming employed in Vermont, and they joined us. Still, out of the 220 some voting members we have, 45% of them are logging contractors. So I pay a lot of attention and have always paid a lot of attention to the needs of our loggers. This issue is not new to us. I climbed the same ladder that Mr. Caribou climbed 2 decades ago. Got the same level of frustration, no enforcement. In 2006 or 7, I can't remember when, this committee, under the leadership of Representative Carolyn Partridge, looked at the civil statutes and we made some changes. And in there, you'll see how we kind of adopted laws from other states that the penalty isn't just the trouble law, but also deals with the diameter of the tree. So you could take a sapling and it could be a $50 fine, and you could take a 18-inch tree that could be a $300 fine, and you can add it up and it's big money. And we thought that was a tool, that was some teeth that would help in enforcement, give state's attorneys something more they can grab onto. Okay, we thought that was maybe the magic bullet. So we worked on that. Got to the Senate Judiciary Committee, and they wanted to play around with it a little bit, and I went over there and I said, please don't. Just take it, please. And they did. But you know how things happen in this process. But nothing happened. Nothing happened. I left the VFPA for a few years and worked for the granite industry. So I had rocks in my head, but I still got sawdust in my veins. So I paid attention. And in 2015, Jonathan Wood was a commissioner before that, but he was frustrated with the fact that stealing trees is criminal. However, it wasn't clear in the law. And our association worked closely with this committee under Representative Partridge's leadership to clarify the criminal statutes. And we thought, well, there we go. We solved it. Here we are again. So enforcement has been that so-called elephant in the room, as you heard. And it's frustrating. Mr. Mahaley came, I got talking to him. We got a couple of conversations last year about this. Mr. Caribou, to his credit, dogged this issue, dogged it to the end. And we're thankful for that. He talked to me several times, frustrated with it. I tried to find solutions that we could do internally through the industry. But there weren't any really clear-cut ways that we could play a role in solving that problem. So Representative Mahaley sent us a draft in the spring. We looked at it. We had a lot of comments on it. We had some concerns about it. He took those concerns to heart, came back with this draft, which we think really does do a lot of good. Hopefully this will be the solution. Now, when I had my sawmill, there was theft going on. There's been theft going on in our whole history of Vermont. Even back when the king owned the trees. And you get your head cut off if you took the king's trees. So there's always been some form of enforcement back then. And we did it on our own. But in a civil society, we need to work with, law and order, and we follow that. It wasn't serious in the 60s, 70s, and 80s when I was becoming more and more part of the industry, more because of the land ownership patterns. Industry owned a lot of land. We took care of it. We watched it. And a lot of landowners were residents of Vermont. As more and more non-residents bought land and bought bigger than just a house lot, bought some privacy, 20 acres, 30 acres, 40 acres. And then some who use it as vacation homes and vacation properties. A lot of absentee landowners. And that's where the problem started to really fester. Because the loggers, bad actors, as we were talking about, and there's only a few, could check the checklist, the grand list, figure out who's resident, who's not, and could figure that out. So that's how it became more and more of a problem, and how we, as legislative body, has been paying more attention to how we're going to fix this problem. So here we are. I support the law. I support the bill as introduced. It seems very clear to me. The only area that I was looking at was in the area of, I think it's seizure, where he tried to tie land improvement to home improvement by using the word when applicable. To me, it's not clear, but I'm not an attorney. I'm sure it probably solves the problem, but I'd like to just get clarity there. Does that really do it? Because it doesn't say, because right after it says in quantity and regulated drug involved. Okay, it doesn't say and the timber that's involved or anything to that area. So I just want to make sure it's clear, because I wouldn't want a defense attorney to say it's not clear and find a wiggle room here.
I think you're alluding to language on page.
Yeah, I should have done that. Identified the exact page and line.
You've got it.
Page 11, line 20.
Line. Okay, yeah.
So,
And I see it again on page 12.
right.
But you're talking about page 11, line 20.
I just want to make sure it's clear, and it probably is. And but it just stood out to me as I flagged it. I just wanted to mention that I flagged it. You know, if you can get clarity on that, I'm comfortable. I'm not seeking any amendments on that at all. In fact, I'm not seeking any amendments. I know that you have listened to the new coming professional logging contractors that they want to study notification and trip tickets. We oppose that. We don't need a study. We did it in 2016. And I'd like to read from that a few of the statements that were made by folks. It was done by the Department of Forest, Parks and Recreation, under the leadership of Commissioner Mike Snyder. And you got a report back then on it. Conducting a, if I may read from the thing, a few pieces. Conducting a successful harvest requires coordination of many moving parts. Landowners, consulting foresters, loggers, truckers, and mills may all be involved at some point in the process of planning or implementing a harvest. To conduct a harvest, loggers and foresters need to be available, equipment needs to be delivered, grounds need to be dry and frozen, weather needs to cooperate, mills need to be buying wood, and everybody needs to work together. Requiring that the state be notified prior to the commencement of a harvest would be another step in an already complex process. So they're recognizing that we do a lot of pre-planning and a lot of players are involved. Any proposal of a harvest notification would be sensitive to this reality. And first, clearly establish that the benefits warrant and outweigh the significant added complexity. Another paragraph, as proposed in this report, implementation costs are estimated to cost $235,000 for the first year and $180,000 annually thereafter. Now, this is 2016, so you can add at least 10% to that inflation or more. First year cost estimates includes $30,000 for design, printing, and distribution of outreach materials, $25,000 for development of an online portal for submission of notifications. Annual costs include $5,000 per year of maintenance and distribution of outreach materials, $5,000 per year of maintenance of the online portal and database maintenance, $30,000 of a half FTE, full-time equivalent, of administrative support directly related to harvest notification, and $140,000 of 2 full-time equivalents to centralize administrative duties of the field staff, allowing county foresters to provide technical assistance related to harvesting and notification. Honest people will follow that law, okay? But it's a burden. The dishonest people won't. If a person is intending to steal someone's trees, they're not going to create a paper chase. They're not going to notify the department. They're not going to have trip tickets. So all you're doing is asking law-abiding citizens to do one more thing in their business. So I find that we really don't need this. I think what we need is to educate landowners. And I'm love where Josie, you were going with that. And I have some thoughts. We'll go there. So I'm hoping that you will pass this bill as is without any major changes. Can hold the intent. The registry, I think, is key. Something we can point at, something that the department can point at, the county foresters can point at, something that we can bring to all landowners, residential or non-residential. And we can do it through probably a pretty simple process. The tax department has the authority to be able to request of the town clerks to put in their tax bills certain statements. And every time you get a tax bill, you see a little thing about the current use program. Okay? So why can't we add in there timber theft? Here's the process. Here's a website you can go to. Caveat emptor. Be aware. Why not? It's a simple process. Affordable and easy to do. It gets everybody. Anybody who has property pays property taxes. They'll get their tax bill and they'll go, ugh, and then they'll read on it. And they'll look at that pink piece of paper and they'll see something on there. You have trees, you want to take care of your trees. You don't want them stolen. Here's a process. Here's the law. You don't have to make it a big wordy thing. You can give them a link. And I think that may go a long ways to doing it. But having that register, okay, if our association is pointing at, if the department is pointing at, if the sheriffs and the state's attorneys are pointing at it, you don't want to be on that list or you're not going to get any business. You're going to have to wait 6 years before you can get your name off that register to be back in business. Okay? And in the meantime, you're going to be working for somebody else. So I see the magic in the registry. I see the magic in the penalties are fun. Now, seizure, it's a tough one. Okay? And it's complicated. And it would be a real challenge for the Attorney General, whoever's going to say we're going to seize this equipment. Okay? But if you do it once, it's all it takes. Once. We talk. Okay? Yeah. That guy lost his business. He lost his equipment. He's done. Now, I work with loggers. The law says the landowner is responsible for containing the sale. So if the landowner does not flag or mark where the trees are to be cut, carefully, or the landowner's agent, which would be a consulting forester, we pay a lot of attention to that. I am very wary. I don't see a well-defined property line as to where I'm going to go and contain that sale. I would either recommend a survey or I go to the neighbors, try to find out where that line is and agree to something. Okay? Due diligence is important. Okay? And most of us will do that. But property lines are not always well marked. I am currently a forester for a timber trespass case now ongoing up in the Northeast Kingdom in Glover. My role is, and I'm representing the logger who had crossed the line unknowingly and accidentally. The landowner did not really contain the sale. He said, yeah, the property line's over there. And he went beyond it because it was not clearly marked. And he went to the next property line. So he took 10 acres of trees from his neighbor. Okay. He didn't realize. I'm happy to pay. But of course, we have a landowner who had timbers taken who wants to take this guy to the end. Okay. So it's a bit contentious. I don't want to get into the details, but we have a role in that as foresters. We measure the stump and we can determine how much volume was taken so that we can apply either the trouble law or you could go with just a single, instead of 3 times the value, you can do it 1 time the value. If it's mistaken and everyone can agree to that. Or you can go by the size of the trees. So I have a record of that. I know the diameter and I know the volume, so we can go either way. So I want to make that. Now, what has complicated the thing is when we go to the state's attorney, they say, is there a contract? Well, it's civil. You have to go to civil court. It's not criminal. I don't know why not, but it seems that's what the answer is. So you go to civil court, and what do you get? Nowhere. So that's been the frustration. But that register, whether you violate civil or criminal, you're on that list. That's, I think, the magic bullet.
Thank you. Representative Levitt has a question and, yeah.
And you're not gonna like this. A mill accepting stolen wood strikes me a lot like a chop shop accepting a stolen car. You're literally breaking it up for parts. And I do think a trip ticket required for every load of wood that a mill processes is the safeguard. Because then you know, as a mill owner, you're not accepting stolen property. And I think that seems like a pretty easy thing to do. And if we can do education for the landowners and say, if you're not getting trip tickets for what has been cut off your land, that's a red flag. And then I don't think a mill should accept any wood that doesn't have proper documentation. And I feel like that is another tool in the toolbox.
Well, mills don't always see the trip ticket.
Well, maybe they should. Maybe that should be part and parcel of how you process your wood is you have to have a trip ticket before a mill will process it. So the mill doesn't get burned and suddenly realize, oh my God, I just processed 10 acres of stolen wood. And they didn't even know. I feel like it's a protection for the landowners and for the mill. And then the nefarious bad actors who won't do trip tickets, then if there's education for landowners, they will know, oh, he won't give me a trip ticket. This guy's shady. I'm actually going to say no.
So I didn't hear a question in there.
Well, no, because he said he didn't want mills to have
I know.
a ticket.
I did hear what he said and I heard what you said, and I think it's a valid point. Was there anything that you wanted to respond to though?
Trip tickets is more complicated than I can give you a few examples. Let's say I'm in a very rural area with a pretty poor class 3 or 4 road that I'm trucking in and out of. So I can't really put 99,000 pounds on my truck, get that wood out. So I have a location near the highway that I can yard wood, okay? So I have a trip ticket for my 20, 30, 40,000 pounds I'm hauling out, okay? And then I go back and do it again. I have another trip ticket for that, okay? And then I do a third load. And only 2.5 loads get onto that big truck with the 99,000 pounds. So what do I do then? I mean, I've got a mixed load. So it doesn't make it that simple to be able to administer trip tickets. You'd have to create a whole new trip ticket, which would then confuse the forester who's trying to be the agent for the landowner to understand what wood went and where it went. That's just a simple one. We ship a lot of wood to Canada. You can't force them to follow our laws.
True.
So then what? So I use trip tickets, and I've had loggers that don't want to use trip tickets or don't use it by habit, but I make them. Okay. I need it so that I can figure out who shipped what where. And I'm looking for the mill slip so that I can provide the mill slip to the landowner with the payment. Okay. And loggers that are in more than one job at a time that have crews use trip tickets for that very same reason, to keep themselves organized. But to make a logger who is just a single guy or, 2-man or 3-man operation, does one job at a time, to have to do all that paper chasing, it's just a burden on them, and they're probably not going to do it. So it's more complicated than you really think. And I don't think that solves the problem of theft, because if they're stealing wood, they're not going to create a paper chase. Okay. And they're going to ship it to Canada.
Right.
Or find someplace or Maine, and so all you're asking are honest, law-abiding citizens to do more and not get anywhere extra. That's all. That's my take.
That's helpful. Thank you. Okay, let's get one more question and then see if the commissioner's office has anything else they'd like to add.
And just ballpark, on a timber job, what are the percentages that the logger gets, the landowner gets, the forester if they're involved, and the trucker?
Okay, those are good. And there are some averages. And there was a question last week about how much money we're talking about, and I did want to put that into my thought. And Sam tried to answer that question that it depends, and it really does depend in a lot of ways, because there are different kinds of contractors. A lot of them like to do lump sum bids. I'll give you $150,000 to cut your trees that are marked by the forester. Okay. And then you pay half up front, and then you pay the other half at the end. It's simple and it's done. Okay. And then I'll pay you a set price per 1,000 board feet per cord, per load of firewood. So the set price. Some of those would do that. A lot of them do percentages because the prices are all over the place and you're going to different mills. So kind of an average rule of thumb on average timber is 1/3, 2/3. Okay, the landowner gets 1/3 and then the logger keeps 2/3. Trucking is taken off the top. So it's 1/3, 2/3 after the trucking has been paid. Okay. On higher quality timber, a logger is willing to give the landowner 40, 50%. I've even seen as high as 60% when there's a lot of veneer in there for certain grades. So you can have some complexities, but basically the 1/3, 2/3 kind of is a standard level going. Now, trees in Vermont grow at about 2% per year, a percent of growth in volume. Okay. I studied my jobs as to how much per acre are we harvesting. I've looked at the state's numbers because they put it out in their reports. If you're harvesting every 20 to 25 years on kind of a sustainable rotation, you can probably figure between $300 and $400 per acre for that harvest. Okay, you're growing about $15 per acre per year on average. That's average. Now there's white pine sites and sugar maple sites and the yellow birch sites that would be a lot higher than that. And if you're doing a shelter wood cut or a different kind of prescription, a clear cut, it would be a lot more than that. But on most of the jobs that I have seen, you're talking in that area. So Mike may be able to tell you how many acres he had done, but he doesn't know how much money he would have made because they didn't give him any. But he can probably use that rule of thumb and kind of figure out what he lost. If you figured $400 per acre for that cut, if they didn't take all your trees. But that's just averages. Okay? It really does vary. So the logger, the forester, I usually tell a landowner that I'm about 15% of what you get. So I take the money from the logger, okay, do the paperwork, write a check to the logger, take 15% off the top. Sometimes on really high quality jobs, it may end up at only 10%. On lower quality jobs, it may end up at 20%. But I say I try to be around 15%. Now, foresters are different. I charge by the hour. Okay, so it's just to give them a ballpark figure where it's going to be. Okay, sometimes I will commit that to a landowner. I won't go over 15% just because I want to be fair and I want to make sure they get plenty of money and they're happy growing trees for us. Foresters have different ways of doing it, but that's how I do it. And Keith might have other answers to that as to how other foresters operate and how the state may operate on that. It's different. But that's just to give you an idea.
What I was getting at is that there's almost never been a case of timber trespass, knowing timber trespass when a forester is involved.
Well, we know that the landowner, and we're the agent of landowner, is responsible for containing the sale. So we put up flagging or we put a lot of paint on trees to say, stop here. And like I say, I've had a surveyor a few times come in to make sure we knew where to stop. I think Mr. Liskey might have different thoughts about that, but I think I'm pretty close to the averages.
I think you've articulated it well.
Thank you.
And just underscoring on boundary marking. Anyone who wants to avoid a problem will not start a log job until the boundaries are clearly marked, blazed and or ribbon, and you have a copy of at a minimum, a tax map, way preferably a survey map. But anything short of all of those above, that's real risk, not worth taking.
Thanks, Ed.
Thank you, Mr. Mahaley, for doing this. Thank the committee for taking the time.
Let's, before we wrap up, see whether there's anything else that anyone from the commissioner's office would
I
like
would
to
have
add.
to follow up on tree wardens, and if you want to keep the follow up on heavy cut, we can do that.
Okay.
Great.
maybe
I
you
would
wanna-
encourage
Yeah.
hearing from Keith.
If this is something you can share right now.
Nice.
Thank you. My name is Keith Thompson. I'm the Private Lands Program Manager with Vermont Forest Parks and Recreation. I'll speak very briefly to heavy cut. It is a permit that's required when 40 acres or more are going to be harvested below the sea line. Sea line is a measure of density of forest, so a clear cut would certainly meet that threshold. There are other levels of cutting where there would be trees remaining, but a permit would still be required. When a heavy cut is going to occur and it's 40 acres or more, a notification is required. There are several exemptions to the requirement of a permit. So notification is still required, but there are exemptions. Those exemptions include if it's ag conversion that's going to go into production within 5 years. If it's conversion or harvesting subject to Act 250. So there's another permit in place. If there's a UVA plan in place or another plan already approved by Vermont and in effect and approved by Vermont Forest Parks and Recreation, or if there's a chip harvest plan that's in effect, they would be exempted from the permit. If they are harvesting and they're not exempted from the permit, or excuse me, from this, then they would need to submit a plan that gets reviewed by Forest Parks and Recreation, demonstrating that the harvesting proposed satisfies silvicultural goals, and it basically meets, except for some of the administrative kind of tax elements, meets UVA plan requirements. So describing the forest stand, providing a silvicultural basis for what's harvesting, and that it's going to be managed as forest moving forward.
Answer. Okay, good.
I have a question, Keith. Thank you for being here. You know, that notion of sea line for non-active is an abstract notion that's been around for decades.
Yes.
A line, B lines. But one thing, this is an observation as a logger. We required training every year, whether you're master logger or LEAP certified or whatever. But a new narrative has been emerging, particularly this year. There's a forester at a UVM. She's a PhD, and she did a training on both biodiversity and sustainability values. And these are complex microorganisms, wildlife, bird, migratory bird, very complex forest ecology issues that she was advocating to I won't say not a receptive audience, but it was education. So my question is, with these new complex values, is FPR or your permits for these heavy cuts or sea line cuts, are they taking into some of these new criteria in permits?
That's a great question. Right now, the rule that establishes what is required by law, statute has not required that. And the rule itself has not changed to incorporate that. As a department, we haven't considered that. There are relatively few heavy cuts that are occurring that are outside that realm of exemptions. There are some, but there are few. I think those resilience goals that I think it was probably Ali Kasiba at UVM Extension was speaking to are extremely compatible and supported by thoughtful active forest management, and the ability to advance those through the management for forest products and for simply restorative purposes is really, I think, a great opportunity that we have in this state. Personally, if we were to be pursuing that, I think that inclusion in the heavy cut could be an opportunity, but it probably would be a priority for other areas, starting strongly with education, exactly as Ali is doing it, that we need to help folks understand this, identify the best ways to do it and integrate it into active management. And because it is a very complex science, bringing in the bureaucracy, the rules, the bright lines that can be very valuable in many aspects also can create barriers if we haven't tended to those details extremely effectively. The right practice in the right place is critical, but creating a bureaucracy, creating an administration that draws those bright lines, that don't evaluate those conditions on the ground and the appropriate practice that advance resilience goals, it's a difficult needle to thread. It's valuable to thread it, but I think that there's a lot of learning that we all have to do before we are tinkering in some of our structures to tie them to permits and things like that.
This isn't really a question for Keith, but just for the assembled room. There are probably more and more cases of firewood being stolen in the case. And I was wondering, in the state, and I was wondering, are those treated as property theft crimes and go to the criminal division as opposed to civil? And it just seemed like if that's the case, it's so similar to timber trespass. Why is timber trespass not treated the same way?
You mean, would the shard even cut staff even?
Right,
Yeah.
yeah.
You're not talking about standing low grade.
No, I'm talking
firewood
about
trees.
somebody has all their firewood for the winter stolen, whether it's in a sugar house or down the road or something. I hear about this a bunch.
Hmm.
And I just wondered if state's attorneys, attorney generals, if those are sort of treated differently as a crime than timber trespass.
It is outside my purview.
Sorry.
We can make a note though, if we're gonna be speaking to somebody, a prosecutor, we can get more information on that. Yeah. Yes, Henry.
I was just wondering if you could talk to the definition, I guess, of forester. I'm thinking of like it feels like in this conversation that, and I think John alluded to it. This one of the barriers to timber theft may be, having a forester on site. And I know like what exactly is the difference between a licensed forester or people that might call themselves forester and somebody that just marks wood? Because there's some shady foresters out there too. Like, this happens in that aspect too. So I'm just wondering what the what the rules are around being a forester and.
Sure. In 2016, the forester licensing law was passed that basically requires that if you are calling yourself a forester in Vermont, then you must be licensed. And with that, you're practicing forestry, you've got the skills, the training, the credibility for mensuration, for making recommendations, implementing forest practices, and then tied to any licensing law or a series of ethics and professional conduct requirements. And so we are, even though it's 2023, we are still in the early stages of forester licensing in Vermont. And there's been, I think, a trend towards understanding where are the lines here? What does it mean? What does it not mean? The person who is preparing a forest management plan or saying, I will implement your forest management plan, and they're marking trees, but they don't have a license, they're practicing without a license. Loggers, there is some difficulty in this. If they are interpreting a forest management plan that has complex silvicultural prescriptions and they're interpreting that and saying that they're implementing it, there's a risk that they may be practicing without a license. And if they are representing that they're a forester and they're unlicensed, there are some difficulties in there. But there are situations where a landowner, for good reason, is looking to harvest trees or clear trees, and it's not according to a forest management plan. It's expanding pasture or something like that, and they engage a logger who's able to do that job extremely well and extremely professionally. There shouldn't be any risk. So it's really about what is the are they licensed and what is the practice that's the service being provided? And it's a case by case basis that's determined.
Thanks for raising that. I'm going to suggest that because we could go on all morning, and we do have others to hear from. Why don't we pause, take a break, and then let's make it a 10-minute